The rain fell hard on the glass dome that covered the rich part of New Atlanta, and the year was 2187, and humanity had built amazing things like ships that could travel faster than light, and computers that could think like humans, and machines that could create almost anything, but still there were people with nothing and nowhere to go. And that was the strange truth about the future, that it was both wonderful and terrible at the same time. Marcus Chen stood under the roof of a delivery station watching the water pour down from the sky, and he was 47 years old and very rich because he had invented new engines for spaceships, and at that moment he was coming back from a fancy party where rich people had promised to give millions of dollars to build cities on other planets, but nobody seemed to care about the problems right here on Earth, and that made him feel strange inside. He owned a huge house with beautiful gardens and a place where his small shuttle could land, and he even had a special house for his dog, and the dog was named Apollo. And it was a very smart dog that had been made smarter by science, and the doghouse had heating and cooling and was probably nicer than most apartments in the lower city where poor people lived. That was when Marcus saw her standing in the rain, and she was young, maybe 14 years old, and her dark skin was shining with water, and her clothes were torn and dirty and hung on her thin body like rags, and she was trying to cover her head with a piece of old plastic. But it was not working very well, and the rain was soaking her completely. But what made Marcus stop and stare was not how wet or poor she looked, but her eyes, and they were not empty or dead, like he had seen in so many homeless people, and instead they were bright and full of life and determination and hope, and it was like looking at a fire that refused to go out, no matter how much rain fell on it. The girl walked toward him slowly, like she was afraid he might run away or disappear, and when she got close enough to speak, her voice was steady, even though her whole body was shaking from the cold. "Excuse me, sir," she said, "and I saw your car arrive and it had the Chen Industries name on it. And so I know who you are, and you are Marcus Chen, right?" Marcus nodded yes, and he felt worried, because he did not know what this girl wanted and whether she might be dangerous or sick or both. "I have been sleeping in the recycling center for 3 weeks," the girl continued, and her words came out faster now, like she was afraid he would leave before she finished talking. But now they are putting in new security systems that can detect human body heat, and I will have nowhere to sleep tonight and probably nowhere to sleep ever again." Marcus reached into his pocket for his credit chip because he thought she wanted money. "And how much do you need for a shelter?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "And that is not what I am asking. For she said quietly, and I read about you on the news networks, and I saw pictures of your house and your dog has a house of his own, and it looks bigger than the emergency shelters, and much cleaner too, and it has heating, right, and it is dry inside." Marcus just stared at her because his brain was trying to understand what she was really asking, and she wanted to sleep in Apollo's doghouse, and the idea was so crazy that he almost laughed. But then he looked at her eyes again, and saw that she was completely serious and completely desperate. "What is your name?" Marcus asked, and his voice was softer now. "Keisha," she answered, "and Keisha Williams. And I am not asking for charity, Mr. Chen, and I just need shelter, and just one night, and your dog's house, and that is all, and I promise I will be gone before the sun comes up." A man appeared next to Marcus, and it was Victor, his security guard, and Victor was big and tough, and used to be in the military, and his hand moved toward his weapon. "And sir, should I call social services?" he asked. "No," Marcus said, and he was still looking at Keisha. "And get the car, and she is coming with us." Victor's face became tight. "And sir, we do not know anything about this person, and security rules say we must do background checks before anyone enters your home." "Then scan her now," Marcus said sharply, "but she is coming with us." Keisha stood very still while Victor ran a portable scanner over her body, and the scanner beeped and showed information on a small screen, and no weapons and no tracking devices and no criminal record, and just a scared homeless kid who had been let down by every system that was supposed to protect her. The car ride to the mansion was completely silent, and Keisha sat in the back seat, and her eyes were wide as she looked at everything. And the car drove itself, and there were holographic screens showing information floating in the air, and the seats were made of real leather that probably cost more than most people earned in a whole year, and she did not touch anything, because she seemed afraid she might break something just by being there. When they arrived at the estate, the gates opened by themselves because they recognized Marcus, and the mansion rose up in front of them like something from a dream, and it was all glass and steel, and beautiful curves and blue lights seemed to glow from inside the walls. Marcus led Keisha through the front door, and Apollo ran up to meet them, and his tail was wagging fast because he was happy to see Marcus home. But then Apollo stopped when he saw Keisha, and he tilted his head sideways the way dogs do when they are trying to figure something out. Keisha got down on her knees slowly and held out her hand, and Apollo walked over and sniffed her fingers, and then he licked them, and she smiled. And it was the first real smile Marcus had seen on her face, and something in his chest felt like it was cracking open. "Come on," Marcus said, "and I will show you where you will be staying." He led her through the house, and they walked past rooms full of expensive furniture and art from different planets, and past his office where he had designed the engines that now powered half the colony ships, leaving Earth, and past the kitchen where robot chefs could make any food from any culture in human history. They stopped at a door, and Marcus put his hand on the scanner, and it opened to show a guest bedroom, and not the doghouse, but a real bedroom. "With a real bed, this is yours," Marcus said. "And there is a bathroom through that door, and clean clothes in the closet, and they might be too big. But they are better than what you have now. And dinner will be ready in an hour." Keisha stood frozen in the doorway, and her eyes moved from the huge bed to the big windows that showed the city lights far below. "And I asked for your dog's house," she whispered. "I know what you asked for," Marcus said. But I am giving you this instead. And get cleaned up and rest, and we will talk after dinner." Why the word burst out of her like she could not hold it in anymore. "And why are you doing this, and you do not know me, and you do not owe me anything?" And why Marcus turned to look at her fully. And because 23 years ago I was homeless too, and I slept in recycling centers and old transport stations, and I ate from garbage, and not one person offered me anything more than money and advice to contact social services, and I built everything I have because I had nowhere to go but up. But it should not be that way, and it should not take becoming a millionaire to get basic human dignity. He walked out and closed the door softly behind him, and left her standing there in a room that was bigger and nicer than anywhere she had slept in years. An hour later, Keisha came out of the bedroom wearing clothes that belonged to Marcus's daughter, and his daughter was named Emma, and she was away studying alien biology on Europa, which was a moon of Jupiter. And the clothes fit Keisha better than anyone expected. They sat down to eat in the dining room, and the robot chef had made pasta with artificial protein and vegetables that were grown in the mansion's indoor garden, and Marcus watched as Keisha ate slowly and carefully like someone who had learned never to waste even a single bite of food. "Tell me about yourself," Marcus said. Keisha looked up and seemed surprised. "And what do you want to know?" she asked. "Whatever you want to tell me," Marcus replied. She was quiet for a long time, and then the words started coming out slowly at first and then faster, like water breaking through a dam. Her mother had worked as a maintenance person on the space stations that orbited Earth. But then the automated systems took over, and her mother lost her job, and they tried to make it work and moved from shelter to shelter. But her mother got sick, and the medical bills took everything they had. And when her mother died 6 months ago, Keisha was 14, and the youth services system said she was old enough to take care of herself. "I am smart," Keisha said, and there was no pride in her voice. Just simple fact. "And I taught myself to write computer code using the public computers, and I can solve quantum math problems in my head, but none of that matters if you do not have a permanent address, and you cannot get into school without an address, and you cannot get a job without school, and you cannot get an address without a job. And it is a circle with no way out." Marcus put down his fork. "And show me," he said. "Show you what Keisha asked, that you can code and that you can solve quantum math, and show me." Marcus took Keisha to his office, and the room had a huge holographic display floating in the center, and it was showing a complex, three-dimensional model of a spaceship engine, and there were parts and chips and half-finished designs scattered everywhere. "This is where I work," Marcus said, "and the computer works with your brain, and you will need to wear one of these." And he handed her a thin silver band. Keisha took it like it was made of gold and put it on her head, and the device turned on, and tiny lights started blinking as it connected with her brain, and her eyes got wide as the holographic display responded to her thoughts. "All right," Marcus said. and he pulled up a coding problem on the screen. And this is something my engineers have been working on for 3 weeks, and it is a program that helps ships find their way through unstable wormholes. And the solution we have works, but it is slow and uses too much computer power. And show me what you can do. Keisha looked at the code for exactly 47 seconds, and then her hands moved. But not in the real world, but through the brain connection, and her thoughts turned directly into commands, and the code started to change, and lines moved around, and new functions appeared. Marcus watched, and his mouth fell open, because she was not just fixing the code, and she was completely rebuilding it. And she was using quantum science, ideas that he had never thought of, and she was making the computer do things in ways that should not be possible. 12 minutes later, she stepped back and done. She said, Marcus ran the test program, and the new code did the calculations, 847% faster than the old one, and it used 62% less power, and it was better at predicting how the wormholes would behave. How he whispered, Keisha shrugged, and I read a research paper about quantum entanglement last year on the free internet, and it said you could use connected particles to predict probability waves. And I just used that idea for space calculations, and the wormholes are not random, and they follow quantum rules, and you just have to know which rules to look for. Marcus sat down hard in his chair, because this 14-year-old homeless girl had just solved a problem that had stopped his team of scientists with doctorates, and she had not just shown talent, and she had shown pure genius. Keisha, he said slowly, and how would you like a job? She laughed, but there was no happiness in it, and I told you. And you cannot get a job without school papers, and you cannot get school papers without school, and you cannot get into school without an address. You have an address, Marcus said, and this is your address now, and you live here, and we will get you into the best schools, and I will pay for everything. And you can work for me part-time and learn real-world skills while you study, and when you are ready, and when you have your degrees and your papers, you can decide if you want to stay with Chen Industries or start your own company. Keisha stared at him. And why would you do this? And you still barely know? Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the glowing city, and I told you I used to be homeless, and what I did not tell you was that someone gave me a chance once, and his name was Leonard Wu. And he owned a small shop that fixed electronics, and he found me sleeping in his alley. And instead of calling the police, he offered me a job, and he let me sleep in his storage room, and he taught me everything he knew about engineering and quantum science. He turned back to face her, and Leonard died 5 years ago, and his heart stopped working, and by then I had already made my first $1 billion, and I tried to pay him back, and I wanted to give him enough money so he would never have to work again, but he refused every credit I offered. And he said the only payment he wanted was for me to do the same for someone else and to pay it forward, and I have been looking for the right person ever since. And I have given money to charities and paid for scholarships and built homeless shelters, but that is not the same as what Leonard did for me, and he did not just give me money, and he gave me a chance, and he saw potential where everyone else saw a problem. Keisha's eyes filled with tears. And what if I fail? And what if I cannot be what you think I can be? Then you fail, Marcus said simply, and we figure out what to do next, but I do not think you are going to fail, Keisha. And I have worked with thousands of brilliant minds in my career, and I have met the best engineers and scientists and programmers in the whole solar system. And what you did just now was not just smart, and it was revolutionary, and you see patterns that other people cannot see. And you make connections that should not be possible. And that is not something you can teach, and that is pure genius, and it would be a crime to let it go to waste because the system failed you. Over the next few days, Marcus kept his promise, and he hired lawyers to handle the paperwork that would make him Keisha's legal guardian. And he called the director of the most expensive and best school in the solar system, and he personally vouched for her admission, and he set up a bank account that would pay for her education and living costs, and give her spending money. News about what Marcus had done spread very fast, and at first the response was good, and news stories ran with titles like Tech Billionaire Saves Homeless Teen and From Streets to Starships One Girl's Journey, and Marcus was praised for his kindness and his vision and his commitment to finding talent no matter where it came from. But then the negative reaction started, and critics said Marcus was playing hero and that he was using Keisha as a publicity stunt, and they questioned his reasons and suggested there must be something wrong about a rich man taking in a young girl. And they called it fake charity and said he was only helping one person while ignoring the bigger problems that created homelessness. Social services started an investigation, and Victor had to give testimony about the security scans, and Marcus's lawyers had to prove that everything was legal and proper and ethical. And the media camped outside his gates, and reporters tried to interview Keisha and shouted questions at her whenever she left the house. Through all of it, Marcus stayed calm because he had expected this and he had dealt with media problems before, but he worried about Keisha and how she was handling all the attention and criticism. He should not have worried. One evening, Marcus found Keisha in his office again, and she was working on another program, and she had been spending every free moment learning and growing and pushing herself to be better. And she looked up when he walked in. "I want to hold a press conference," she said. Marcus frowned. "And you do not have to do that, and let the lawyers handle it and let this blow over." "I want to," she insisted, "and these people are saying terrible things about you and about us, and they are making it into something dirty when it is not. And I want to tell them the truth." "What truth is that?" Marcus asked. Keisha stood up, and her young face was set with determination. "And that what you did and what you are doing is what every human being should do, and that seeing someone in need and helping them should not be newsworthy, and it should be normal. And that the real story is not that you helped me, and it is that thousands of people saw me standing in that rain and did nothing." The press conference was held at Chen Industries headquarters 3 days later, and the big room was packed with reporters and cameras and curious people who wanted to see what would happen. And Marcus sat beside Keisha at the main table, with Victor standing guard nearby. Keisha walked up to the speaking platform, and she had refused help writing a speech and insisted on doing it herself, and Marcus had read it once and told her it was perfect. "My name is Keisha Williams," she began, and her voice was steady and clear. "And 3 weeks ago I was homeless, and I had been sleeping in recycling centers and abandoned buildings, and I was cold and hungry and scared. And I stood in the rain that night knowing I had nowhere to go, and knowing that by morning I might be arrested, or worse." She paused and let those words sink in. "I went up to Marcus Chen that night because I was desperate, and I asked him if I could sleep in his dog's house, and not his home but his dog's house, and that is how low I had fallen, and that is how broken the system had made me, and I was willing to sleep where an animal slept just to have shelter." Her voice grew stronger. "But Marcus Chen did not let me sleep in a doghouse, and he gave me a room in his home, and he gave me clothes and food and, most importantly, hope. And he did not see a homeless kid, and he saw a person, and he saw potential, and he saw someone worth saving. Now I am hearing people say he is doing this for publicity, or that there is something wrong with his actions, and I'm hearing people question his reasons, and you know what makes me angry? And it is not the accusations, and it is that we live in a world where basic human decency is so rare that when someone shows it, we assume there must be a hidden reason." The room had gone completely silent, and every reporter was leaning forward and listening to every word. "Marcus Chen told me about a man named Leonard Wu, and a man who helped him when he was in my position, and Leonard did not ask for anything in return, and he just helped. Because it was the right thing to do, and that is what Marcus is doing for me, and that is what he is trying to teach me. And not just quantum physics and engineering, but how to be human, and how to see people who are suffering, and do something about it." She looked directly into the nearest camera. "There are millions of people like me, and kids living on the streets, and adults who lost everything and cannot find a way back, and we have built ships that can travel to other stars, and we have created computers that can think faster than any human, and we have cured diseases and made people live to be over 150 years old, but we cannot figure out how to house and feed everyone, and that is not a technology problem, and that is a humanity problem. Marcus Chen is not a perfect person, and I am not a perfect person, but what he did for me should be normal, and that should be what we expect from each other, and not just from billionaires or celebrities, but from every single person. And if you see someone suffering and you have the power to help, then you help. And it is that simple." She paused again, and when she spoke next, tears rolled down her face. "Do you know what breaks my heart? And it is not the nights I spent hungry or cold, and it is not the people who ignored me or treated me like trash. And what breaks my heart is knowing that right now, while we are having this conversation, there are kids, just like I was standing in the rain, hoping someone will see them, and most of them will not get lucky like I did. And most of them will be ignored or arrested or worse. Marcus Chen's response broke everyone's hearts, not because of what he did, but because it reminded us of what we are not doing, and it held up a mirror and showed us that we are living in a society that has the resources to help everyone, but chooses not to, and that we would rather spend billions on colonies on Mars than on making sure every kid on Earth has a safe place to sleep. She wiped her eyes and stood up straight. So here is what I want to say to everyone watching this, and do not praise Marcus Chen and learn from him, and do not make him a hero and become one yourself. And the next time you see someone who needs help, do not walk past and do not assume someone else will deal with it, and do not tell yourself it is not your problem, and help them, and in whatever way you can. And maybe you cannot give them a home like Marcus did for me, but you can give them a meal or a coat or a kind word or a moment of human connection that reminds them they matter. That is what it means to be human, and not our technology or our accomplishments and our humanity and our ability to see suffering and care about it, and to see someone at their lowest and lift them up. And that is what makes us great, and that is what makes us worthy of all the amazing things we have built. And to Marcus Chen, she turned to look at him directly. And thank you, and not just for what you have given me, but for reminding the world what we should be. And thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away. The room erupted, and not with shouted questions but with applause. And it started with one reporter, and then spread through the entire room, and people were crying, including several of the tough journalists who had covered wars and disasters without shedding a tear. The video of Keisha's speech went viral instantly, and within hours it had been watched by over 2 billion people across Earth and the colonies, and within days it had reached every corner of human civilization, from the mining stations in the asteroid belt to the people working to make Mars livable. But more than that, it started a movement, and people started sharing their own stories. And a woman in Tokyo, who had been homeless for 3 years and was helped by a small business owner, and a man in Sao Paulo, who had lost everything in an economic collapse and was given a second chance by a local teacher, and stories poured in from across the solar system, and tales of human kindness that had been forgotten in the daily struggle to survive. More importantly, people started acting, and a group of business leaders, inspired by Keisha's words, pledged to create programs to help homeless youth, and governments began fixing their social services systems, and citizens organized volunteer networks to give immediate help to those in need. Marcus watched it all happen with a mixture of pride and humility, and this was not about him anymore. And it never really had been, and it was about the simple act of caring and of seeing another human being in pain and choosing to help. 6 months after that rainy night, Marcus stood in his office watching Keisha work, and she had enrolled in the best school and was already at the top of her class. And she had written 2 research papers about quantum navigation that had changed how deep space travel worked, but more than that, she had become a symbol of hope, not just for homeless youth, but for humanity itself. I have been thinking, Keisha said without looking up from her work, and about what happens after I graduate. Marcus said as he sat down in a chair, and what have you decided? I want to start a foundation and use the ideas you have taught me, but make them bigger, and not just helping one person at a time, but creating systems that catch people before they fall through the cracks, in education programs and job training and housing help, and all of it working together, and all of it focused on seeing people as people, not problems. Marcus smiled, and I think that is an excellent idea. And have you thought of a name? The Leonard Wu Foundation. Keisha said right away, and because none of this would exist without him, and without his choice to help you, which led to you helping me, which led to all of this. And we need to honor that chain of kindness. Something warm filled Marcus's chest, and Leonard would have loved this and would have been proud of what his simple act of kindness had finally created. There is something I want to show you, Marcus said, and he pulled up a holographic display, and these are the numbers from the past 6 months, and homelessness is down 34% in major cities across Earth, and youth unemployment has dropped by 28%, and volunteer hours for social services have increased by 412%, and private donations to homeless help programs have tripled. He looked at her directly, and you did that. And your words and your story, and you changed the conversation, and you reminded people that they have the power to make a difference. Keisha shook her head, and we did that, and you and me and Leonard and everyone who decided to help instead of look away. And that is the real story. And not one person being a hero, but millions of people choosing to be a little bit kinder. Over the next 3 years, Keisha worked harder than anyone Marcus had ever seen. And she studied during the day and worked on foundation plans at night. And she reached out to other young people who had been homeless and listened to their stories and learned what they really needed. The Leonard Wu Foundation officially launched when Keisha was 16, and it started small with just a few programs in New Atlanta. But word spread fast, and donations came in from people who had been inspired by her story. And within a year, they had helped 500 people find stable housing and real jobs. But Keisha was not satisfied with just helping people survive, and she wanted to help them thrive. And so the foundation created free coding classes and engineering workshops and science programs, and they partnered with companies like Chen Industries to provide internships and real work experience. Marcus watched her work and saw himself in her, but also saw something different and something better. And where he had been driven by a desire to escape poverty, Keisha was driven by a desire to end it. And where he had focused on building wealth, she focused on building community. And where he had worked alone, she brought people together. One day, a reporter asked Keisha how she managed to do so much while still being a full-time student, and she smiled and said that when you have spent nights not knowing where you will sleep or when you will eat next, you learn not to waste time, and you learn that every moment matters, and you learn to focus on what is truly important. The foundation grew, and by the time Keisha was 17, they had expanded to 12 cities and helped over 10,000 people, and they had built partnerships with schools and businesses and governments and created a network of support that could catch people before they became homeless in the first place. But success brought new challenges, and some people accused the foundation of being too selective and only helping people who showed promise like Keisha had, and others said they were not addressing the root causes of poverty and just putting bandages on a broken system. Keisha listened to every criticism, and instead of getting defensive, she made changes, and the foundation started working with people who had mental health issues and addiction problems and disabilities, and they partnered with policy experts to push for systemic reforms, and they never lost sight of their core mission, which was to see every person as worthy of help regardless of their potential or productivity. When Keisha turned 18, she graduated at the top of her class, with degrees in quantum physics and aerospace engineering, and she was the youngest person ever to earn those credentials, and every major corporation and research institution in the solar system offered her a position, and some offers included salaries that would make her a millionaire overnight. She turned them all down. Instead, she announced the creation of Williams Technologies, and a company focused entirely on creating tools and systems to help disadvantaged communities and affordable housing units that could be built in days instead of months, and educational software that adapted to each person's learning style, and job training programs that could be accessed from anywhere in the solar system. Marcus attended the company launch ceremony, and as he watched Keisha give her opening speech, he thought about that rainy night 4 years ago, and about the scared, desperate girl who had asked to sleep in a doghouse, and about the brilliant, confident young woman she had become. But more than that, he thought about Leonard Wu, and about how one man's choice to help a homeless kid had rippled forward through time and touched thousands of lives and changed the course of history in small but meaningful ways. That was the real power of humanity, and not their starships or their quantum computers or their ability to make planets suitable for human life, and it was their capacity for kindness and their ability to see someone suffering and care enough to do something about it. It was the ability to break your own heart by seeing someone else's pain, and then to heal both hearts by taking action. As Keisha finished her speech and the crowd erupted in applause, Marcus felt tears on his face, and they were happy. Tears, and proud tears, and tears for Leonard, and for Keisha, and for all the people they had helped and would continue to help. Keisha found him afterward. "And thank you for coming," she said as she hugged him tightly. "I would not have missed it." Marcus replied, "And Leonard would have been so proud of you." "He would have been proud of all of us," Keisha corrected. "And for remembering that being human is not about how advanced our technology gets, and it is about how we treat each other when no one is watching, and it is about choosing to help instead of walking away, and it is about breaking our hearts open so we can let more love in. She was right, of course, and she usually was. Marcus looked around the room at all the people who had come to celebrate this moment, and he saw homeless youth who were now employed, and he saw volunteers who had dedicated their lives to helping others, and he saw business leaders who had been inspired to use their wealth for good, and he saw government officials who had pushed through policy reforms. All of this had started with one choice and one moment of compassion, and one decision to see a person instead of a problem, and that was the miracle, and not the technology or the science or the money, but the simple human choice to care. Williams Technologies grew faster than anyone expected, and within the first year, Keisha had hired 50 engineers and designers and social workers, and together they created products that actually worked for poor communities, and not just products that rich people thought poor people needed. The first product was a housing unit that could be assembled in 3 days using automated construction robots, and it was small but efficient, and had solar panels and water recycling and cost less than 10,000 credits, and cities across Earth started ordering them by the hundreds. The second product was an educational program that used brain interface technology, similar to what Keisha had used in Marcus's office, and it could teach anyone, any skill from basic reading to advanced engineering, and it adapted to how each person learned and was completely free to use. The third product was a job matching system that connected employers with workers based on potential rather than credentials, and it used advanced algorithms to identify people who had the right mindset and drive, even if they lacked formal education, and hundreds of companies signed up to use it. But what made Williams Technologies truly different was not the products themselves, but how they were distributed, and everything was provided at cost or for free to communities in need, and the company made its money by licensing the technology to wealthy clients who could afford to pay premium prices, and this model allowed them to serve both the rich and the poor, without exploiting either. Keisha became famous in a way that made her uncomfortable, and news outlets called her the girl who changed the world, and magazines put her on their covers, and universities offered her honorary degrees, and she was invited to speak at the United Earth Congress. She accepted the invitation to speak at Congress because she knew it was a chance to push for bigger changes, and when she stood at the podium in front of representatives from every nation and colony, she did not talk about her success or her company, and instead she talked about the people who were still suffering. "We have made incredible progress," she said, "and homelessness is down, and unemployment is down, and more. People have access to education and housing, but we are still treating poverty as an individual problem when it is a systemic one, and we are still asking, why don't poor people work harder, instead of asking why does our system create poverty in the first place?" She proposed a series of reforms and universal basic income for all citizens and free health care, including mental health services and guaranteed housing as a human right, and massive investment in education and job training, and, most controversially, a wealth tax on the richest individuals and corporations to fund these programs. The proposals were met with mixed reactions, and progressive leaders praised her vision, and conservative leaders accused her of promoting socialism, and business groups worried about the economic impact, but the public response was overwhelmingly positive, and millions of people across the solar system voiced their support. Marcus watched the speech from his office and felt a complex mix of emotions, and he was proud of Keisha for using her platform to push for change, but he also knew that some of her proposals would hurt people like him, and people who had built their wealth through hard work and innovation. That evening, Keisha came to his office, and she looked tired but determined. "And I know you probably disagree with some of what I said today," she began. Marcus nodded. "And I do disagree with some of it, and I think some of your proposals go too far, but I also think you are asking the right questions, and I built my wealth in a system that allowed me to succeed, but that same system failed you and millions of others. And maybe it is time to change the system. You could lose billions if these reforms pass," Keisha said. Marcus shrugged. "And I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and what good is wealth if the society around you is crumbling? And what good is success if it is built on other people's suffering? And Leonard taught me that. True wealth is not measured in credits but in the positive impact you have on the world. And you have taught me that lesson all over again. Over the next 2 years, the political landscape shifted and inspired by Keisha's speech and the broader movement. She had helped create governments, began implementing reforms, and some were small like increased funding for homeless services, and some were large like pilot programs for universal basic income in several major cities. The Leonard Wu Foundation continued to grow, and by its 5th anniversary it had helped over 50,000 people, and the foundation had expanded beyond Earth to colonies on Mars and the Moon, and the orbital stations, and everywhere it went, it brought the same message. And every person deserves dignity, and every person deserves a chance. Williams Technologies continued to innovate, and they developed new medical devices that could diagnose and treat diseases in poor communities, and new agricultural systems that could grow food in harsh environments, and new transportation solutions that connected isolated communities to opportunities. But with success came new attacks, and critics accused Keisha of being a hypocrite and pointed out that she was now a millionaire herself and that her company paid its executives high salaries while claiming to serve the poor. And some former homeless advocates said she had sold out and lost touch with the struggles of ordinary people. Keisha addressed these criticisms head on in an interview, and yes, I am wealthy now, she said, and yes, my company pays competitive salaries, but we also ensure that 70% of our products and services go to people who cannot afford to pay. And we have a transparent salary structure where the highest paid employee makes no more than 10 times what the lowest paid employee makes. And I personally donate 90% of my income to the foundation. And I am not perfect, and I make mistakes. But I am trying to use the resources I have to create systemic change, not just to feel good about myself. The interview went viral, and once again Keisha had managed to shift the conversation. And instead of debating whether she was a hypocrite, people started debating what responsibilities wealthy people had to society, and whether it was possible to be both successful and ethical in a capitalist system. Marcus watched all of this unfold and marveled at how much had changed in just 5 years. And when he had taken Keisha in, he had thought he was saving one person. But she had saved thousands and inspired millions and changed the way society thought about poverty and wealth and responsibility. One night, Marcus and Keisha sat together in his office, and it had become their tradition to meet there once a week, to talk about everything and anything, and tonight, they were looking out at the city lights and thinking about the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Keisha asked, and taking me in, and everything that came after. Marcus looked at her in surprise, and never, and why would I? "Because your life would be simpler," Keisha said. "And you would not have to deal with all the controversy and the media attention and the political pressure, and you could just run your company and live your life. And instead you are caught up in all of this because of me." Marcus shook his head. "And my life was simple before, and it was also empty. And I had everything I thought I wanted, and money, and success, and respect, but I was not happy, and I was not fulfilled, and I was not living up to Leonard's example, and you gave me the chance to do that, and to be the person he believed I could be, and so, no, I do not regret any of it. And in fact, taking you in was the best decision I ever made." Keisha smiled and reached over and squeezed his hand. "And I used to think you saved my life," she said. But now I think maybe we saved each other." "Maybe we did," Marcus agreed. Or maybe Leonard saved us. Both, and even though he is gone, his kindness keeps rippling forward and touching new lives and creating new possibilities. 10 years after that rainy night, the world looked very different, and homelessness had decreased by 68% globally, and not just because of government programs or charity, but because millions of ordinary people had been inspired to help in small and large ways. The Leonard Wu Foundation had become one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the solar system, and it operated in over 200 cities across Earth and Mars and the Moon and the orbital colonies, and it had helped more than 300,000 people find stable housing and meaningful work. Williams Technologies had grown into a major corporation employing 15,000 people. But it maintained its unusual business model, and 75% of its products still went to underserved communities at cost or for free, and the company was profitable. Not despite this model, but because of it. and because customers knew their purchases were funding real social change. Keisha was now 28 years old and had become one of the most influential people in the solar system, and she had been offered positions in government and university presidencies and corporate board seats, and she had turned them all down because she believed the work she was doing was more important than any title or position. Marcus was now 57 and had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Chen Industries, and he spent most of his time working with the foundation and mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to build businesses that served both profit and purpose, and he had given away more than half his wealth and felt richer than he ever had. But success had not eliminated all problems, and there were still millions of people living in poverty, and still children sleeping in the streets, and still systems that failed the most vulnerable, and the work was far from over. One day, Keisha received a message that changed everything, and it was from a girl named Maya Rodriguez, who was 15 years old and living on the streets of New Angeles, and she had watched Keisha's original press conference speech over and over, and had been inspired to reach out. The message said, "I know you probably get thousands of messages like this, but I wanted to tell you that your story gave me hope, and I have been homeless for 2 years since my parents died, and I sleep in abandoned buildings and recycling centers just like you did, and I am not asking you to save me, and I know you cannot help everyone. And I just wanted you to know that knowing someone like me could become someone like you makes the hard days a little easier." Keisha read the message 3 times and felt her heart break, and she had tried so hard to create systems that would help everyone, but here was proof that those systems were still not enough, and there were still kids falling through the cracks. She showed the message to Marcus, and "What should I do?" she asked, "And I cannot personally help every homeless kid, but I also cannot just ignore this." Marcus read the message and thought for a moment, and then he smiled. "And do what I did for you and help her. And not because you can help everyone, but because you can help her. And sometimes the most important thing is not solving every problem, but solving the one right in front of you." Keisha contacted Maya that same day, and within a week, Maya was living in a small apartment paid for by the foundation and enrolled in school and working part-time at Williams Technologies, learning engineering and coding. But Keisha did not stop there, and she realized that Maya's message represented thousands of other kids who were too afraid or too proud to reach out, and so she created a new program called Second Chances, and it was specifically designed to find and help young people who were slipping through existing support systems. The program used artificial intelligence to scan social services databases and school records and public assistance applications, looking for patterns that indicated a young person was at risk, and then it proactively reached out to offer help before they became homeless, rather than waiting for them to ask. The program was controversial, and privacy advocates worried about the surveillance implications, and some people said it was too paternalistic and assumed young people could not help themselves. But the results spoke for themselves, and in its first year, Second Chances prevented over 5,000 young people from becoming homeless. Maya thrived in her new environment, and it turned out she had a gift for mechanical engineering and could look at any machine and understand how it worked. And within 6 months, she had designed a new type of water filtration system that could turn ocean water into drinking water using only solar power, and it was so efficient that Williams Technologies put it into production immediately. Keisha watched Maya's progress with a strange mix of pride and sadness, and she was thrilled that Maya was succeeding, but she also saw herself 10 years ago and realized how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. One evening, Maya asked Keisha a question that had clearly been bothering her: "And why do you still work so hard when you have already done so much and you could retire and live comfortably? And instead you work 70-hour weeks and barely sleep?" And why Keisha thought about how to answer. "And because I remember what it felt like," she said, finally. "And I remember standing in that rain and feeling invisible and feeling like the world had given up on me. And I remember the moment Marcus saw me, and really saw me, and treated me like a person who mattered. And I work this hard because I want every person to feel that, and to feel seen and valued and worthy of help. But you cannot save everyone." Maya said gently, "No, I cannot." Keisha agreed, "But I can save some, and I can create systems that save more, and I can inspire others to save even more, and every person saved is a victory, and every life changed is worth the effort." And I learned that from Marcus, and he learned it from Leonard Wu. And now I am teaching it to you, and maybe someday you will teach it to someone else. And that is how change happens, and not all at once, but one person at a time and one choice at a time. The conversation stuck with Maya, and she began to understand that she was not just the recipient of charity, and she was part of a chain and a legacy of kindness that stretched back through Keisha to Marcus to Leonard Wu, and maybe even further back to people whose names had been forgotten, but whose actions still echoed forward through time. 3 years later, Maya graduated with honors and turned down offers from major corporations and instead joined the Leonard Wu Foundation full-time. And her first project was to expand Second Chances to the Mars colonies, where homeless youth faced even harsher conditions than on Earth. Keisha watched Maya present her plans to the foundation board and felt the same pride Marcus must have felt watching her. And it was the pride of seeing potential fulfilled, and of knowing that the help you gave had multiplied and spread and created new possibilities. After the presentation, Marcus approached Keisha, and she did well, he said. She did, Keisha agreed, and I see so much of myself in her, and the determination and the anger at injustice, and the hope that things can be better. Marcus nodded, and that is what Leonard saw in me, and what I saw in you, and what you see in her. And that is the real miracle, and not the technology or the money or the programs, but the ability to see potential in people that society has written off, and to give them the tools they need to prove everyone wrong. They stood together watching Maya talk excitedly with other foundation members, and both of them knew that this was just the beginning, and that the chain of kindness would continue long after they were gone. And that was the closest thing to immortality that humans could achieve. 20 years after that rainy night, Marcus Chen was 67 years old and sitting in a hospital bed, and his heart was failing just like Leonard Wu's had, and the doctors said he had maybe 6 months left, and maybe less. Keisha sat beside his bed holding his hand and refusing to accept what the doctors were saying. And there has to be something we can do, she said. And we have the best medical technology in human history, and you cannot just give up. Marcus smiled weakly. And I am not giving up, and I have lived a good life and a full life, and I have done more than I ever dreamed possible. And I am ready. I am not ready, Keisha said, in tears streaming down her face. And I still need you, and the foundation needs you. And there is still so much work to do. The work will continue, Marcus said, and you do not need me anymore. And you have not needed me for a long time, and you have become everything I hoped you would be, and everything Leonard hoped I would be. And the foundation is in good hands, and Williams Technologies is thriving, and Maya and thousands of others are carrying on the mission, and my part in this story is done. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's condition deteriorated, and he spent his remaining time saying goodbye to the people he loved. And his daughter Emma came from Europa, and Victor came and cried despite his tough exterior, and hundreds of employees and friends and people whose lives he had touched came to pay their respects. But the person who spent the most time with him was Keisha, and she sat by his bed reading to him and talking about the foundation's work and sharing stories about all the lives that had been changed because of what he started one afternoon when they were alone. Marcus said, I need to tell you something, and something I should have said a long time ago. What is it? Keisha asked. When I took you in that night, I told you it was because of Leonard and because I wanted to pay forward what he did for me. And that was true. But it was not the whole truth. And the whole truth is that I was lonely, and my daughter was away, and my work felt empty, and I was looking for meaning, and you gave me that, and you saved me just as much as I saved you, and maybe more. Keisha squeezed his hand, and I know, she said, and I have always known, and that is what makes it beautiful, and it was not charity, and it was two people who needed each other, finding each other at exactly the right moment. Marcus smiled, and I wish Leonard could see what we built and what you built. Maybe he can, Keisha said, and if there is anything after this, and I think he is watching, and I think he is proud. Few days later, Marcus Chen died peacefully in his sleep, with Keisha holding his hand, and the news spread across the solar system within minutes, and millions of people mourned the loss of a man who had used his wealth and influence to make the world better. The funeral was held in New Atlanta, and thousands of people attended, and they came from Every walk of life, and homeless people he had helped, and billionaires he had inspired, and scientists whose work he had funded, and children who had been saved by programs he created. Keisha gave the eulogy, and her voice was steady, despite her grief. And Marcus Chen was many things she said, and he was an inventor and an entrepreneur and a philanthropist, but more than anything, he was kind, and he saw people who were invisible, and he helped people who were forgotten. And he taught me that the measure of a person is not what they achieve, but what they give. She paused and looked out at the crowd, and 20 years ago, I was a homeless girl standing in the rain, and I asked this man if I could sleep in his dog's house, and that is how desperate I was, and that is how far I had fallen, and his response broke my heart and breaks my heart still. And not because he said no, but because he said yes, in a way I never expected. And he gave me a home, and an education, and a chance. And he gave me the tools to change my own life and to help others change theirs. But Marcus would not want this day to be about sadness, and he would want it to be about action. And so I am announcing today the Marcus Chen Scholarship Fund, and it will provide full scholarships to 1,000 homeless youth every year, and it will give them the same chance he gave me, and the same chance Leonard Wu gave him. And that is how we honor his memory, and not with tears, but with action, and not by mourning what we lost, but by continuing what he started. After the funeral, Keisha returned to Marcus's mansion, and it felt empty without him, and Apollo, the dog who was now very old, came and laid his head on her lap, and they sat together in silence. Remembering Marcus had left most of his wealth to the foundation and had left the mansion to Keisha along with a letter, and she opened it with shaking hands. The letter said, "Dear Keisha, and by the time you read this I will be gone, and I hope my death was peaceful, and I hope I did not suffer, but more than that, I hope I left the world a little better than I found it. And I know that you will continue the work we started, and you will do it better than I ever could. And I am leaving you the house, not because you need it, but because it represents something important, and it represents the moment when everything changed, and when a homeless girl asked for shelter and found a home, and when a lonely man found purpose, and I want you to use this house to create more of those moments and fill it with people who need help and turn it into a place of transformation. And that is my final request, and that would make me happy. And Leonard would approve. And I love you like a daughter, and I am so proud of who you have become." Keisha read the letter 3 times and cried until she had no more tears left, and then she stood up and looked around the mansion and knew exactly what to do. Within 6 months, the mansion had been transformed into the Leonard Wu Academy and a residential school for homeless youth who showed exceptional potential, and it could house 50 students at a time and provide them with education and mentorship and support and everything they needed to succeed. Maya Rodriguez became the Academy's first director, and she brought the same passion and determination to the role that Keisha had brought to Williams Technologies, and that Marcus had brought to Chen Industries, and that Leonard Wu had brought to his small electronics shop all those years ago. The Academy's first class included 25 students from across Earth and Mars, and they came from different backgrounds and different circumstances. But they all shared one thing, and they all had potential that society had overlooked, and they all deserved a chance. On opening day, Keisha stood in front of the students and told them the story of how she had asked to sleep in a doghouse, and how Marcus had responded, and how that one moment of kindness had rippled forward and changed thousands of lives. "Now it is your turn," she said, "and you are here because someone saw potential in you, and because we believe you can change the world. But more importantly, you are here to learn how to see potential in others, and how to help people who are where you used to be. And that is the real lesson, and not how to succeed, but how to lift others up as you rise." 30 years after that rainy night, Keisha Williams stood on the balcony of what used to be Marcus Chen's office and looked out at New Atlanta, and she was 44 years old now, and her hair had started to show gray, and the city below had changed, so much that she barely recognized it. The homeless camps that once filled the lower districts were gone, and not because people had been forced out, but because they had been given real homes, and the emergency shelters had been replaced with permanent, supportive housing, and the streets were cleaner and safer, and the gap between rich and poor had narrowed considerably. The Leonard Wu Foundation had helped over 2 million people across the solar system, and the Marcus Chen Scholarship Fund had educated 30,000 formerly homeless youth, and Williams Technologies had become the fifth largest company in human space and still maintained its commitment to serving those in need. The Leonard Wu Academy had graduated over 1,000 students, and many of them had gone on to start their own companies or foundations or programs, and the ripple effect that started with Leonard helping Marcus, and Marcus helping Keisha, had spread across human civilization, like waves spreading from a stone dropped in water. But Keisha knew the work was not finished, and there were still people suffering, and still systems that failed the vulnerable, and still too much poverty and inequality, and the problems had changed, but they had not disappeared. He was thinking about all this when Maya Rodriguez entered the office, and Maya was now 33, and had become one of the most respected humanitarian leaders in the solar system, and she had just returned from Titan, where she had been setting up new support programs for the mining communities. "We have a situation," Maya said, and her face was serious, and there is a young person at the gate, and he says he has nowhere else to go, and he is asking if he can stay in the gardening shed. Keisha felt something click inside her chest. "And how old?" 16, Maya replied. "And his name is Carlos, and he has been living on the streets for 8 months since his family was deported to a colony world, and he could not go with them because of legal issues. And he heard about the academy, but applications are closed for this year, and so he came anyway." Keisha stood up and let me talk to him. She walked down to the gate and found a thin boy with dark eyes that burned with the same determination she remembered seeing in her own reflection 30 years ago, and he stood in the rain, and it was raining just like that night so long ago, and history was repeating itself in a way that made her heart ache. "Carlos," she said, "and I am Keisha Williams, and I heard you are looking for a place to stay." The boy nodded. "And I know the academy is full, and I am not asking to be a student, and I just need somewhere dry. And I saw you have a gardening shed, and I could sleep there, and I would not be any trouble. And I would leave before anyone noticed." Keisha felt tears in her eyes. "And why did you come here?" "Because I read your story," Carlos said, "and I watched your speech 100 times. And I know what Marcus Chen did for you, and I thought maybe, and just maybe, and someone here might understand, and I am not asking for a miracle, and just a dry place to sleep." Keisha opened the gate. "And come with me," she said, "and you are not sleeping in any shed." She led him through the mansion and past the dormitories where academy students lived, and past the classrooms and labs and libraries, and to a small private room that had once been a guest bedroom. "This is yours," she said, "and there is a bathroom through that door, and clean clothes in the closet. And dinner is at 6, and tomorrow we will talk about getting you enrolled as a student." Carlos stood frozen. "And why? And why are you doing this?" Keisha smiled through her tears. "And because 30 years ago I stood where you are standing, and I asked to sleep in a doghouse, and someone saw me as a person worth saving. And because that kindness changed my life and changed the world. And because I learned that the most important thing we can do is help the person standing in front of us, and the systems and programs and foundations are important. But sometimes what matters most is one person seeing another person and choosing to help." She paused and looked at him directly. "And also because I think you are going to do great things, and I think you are going to help others someday. And I think this is how change happens. And one act of kindness at a time, and one person at a time, and one choice at a time. And that is the legacy of Leonard Wu and Marcus Chen. And now it is yours too." That night, Keisha sat in what used to be Marcus's office and wrote in her journal, and she wrote about the strange circle of life, and how Carlos's arrival had brought everything full circle, and how she finally understood what Marcus must have felt that night, 30 years ago, when he decided to help her. She wrote, "I used to think Marcus saved me that night, but now I understand that we saved each other, and he needed purpose, and I needed hope, and we found both in each other, and now I think that is what human connection really is, and not one person rescuing another, but two people helping each other become who they are meant to be." She wrote, "I used to think the goal was to solve poverty and homelessness and inequality, and to fix all the broken systems, but now I think the goal is simpler and harder, and it is to never stop caring, and to never stop seeing people, and to never stop helping, and even when it feels overwhelming, and even when the problems seem too big, and because every person helped is a victory, and every life changed matters." She wrote, "Marcus used to say that Leonard's kindness rippled forward through time, and now I see those ripples everywhere, and in every person we have helped, and in every program we have created and in every life that has been transformed, and the ripples spread wider and wider and touch more and more people. And that is the true miracle, and not the technology or the wealth or the systems, but the simple human choice to care. 5 years later, Carlos graduated from the academy at the top of his class and turned down offers from major corporations and joined the Leonard Wu Foundation. And his first project was to expand programs to help young people affected by family deportations. And within 10 years, he had helped over 50,000 people. 15 years after that, Carlos found a young girl living on the streets and brought her to the academy. And the girl's name was Aisha, and she went on to become a doctor who revolutionized emergency medicine in underserved communities. And Aisha helped a young man named Jordan, who became an architect who designed affordable housing. And Jordan helped a young woman named Sophie, who became a teacher who created new educational methods. And on the chain continued. When Keisha Williams was 74 years old, she sat in a ceremony honoring the 100th anniversary of the night she asked to sleep in Marcus Chen's Doghouse. And by then, the Leonard Wu Foundation had helped over 10 million people. And the Marcus Chen Scholarship Fund had educated over 500,000 formerly homeless youth. And the Leonard Wu Academy had graduated over 10,000 students. But more importantly, the philosophy that started with Leonard Wu had spread across human civilization, and most schools now taught classes on compassion and community responsibility, and most companies had programs to help disadvantaged communities, and most governments had reformed their social services to focus on prevention rather than punishment. Homelessness still existed, but it had decreased by 92%, and more importantly, society's attitude had changed, and people no longer saw homeless individuals as problems to be solved, but as people who deserved help and dignity and respect. At the ceremony, Keisha stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd and saw faces of every age and background, and saw people whose lives had been changed by the ripple effect that started so long ago, and she felt overwhelmed by gratitude and love and hope. 100 years ago, she said, and a man named Leonard Wu made a choice, and he saw a homeless young man and chose to help, and that choice led to another choice, and another, and now here we are, and millions of lives changed, and countless acts of kindness, and a world that is better than it was. And that is the power of humanity, and not our technology or our achievements, but our ability to see each other and care for each other and lift each other up, and that power lives in each of you and in every choice you make, and in every person you help. And that is how we change the world, in one heart at a time.